Hey, it's Friday again, and we are here live. You and I are here live at the Nutmeg Tavern, and we're going to have a fun Friday. Friday is always great, especially late in the afternoon. I've got Ryan's behind the bar, but you can't see him. There he is. He's still putting on his... No?
Hello.
Yes, hello. Okay. There is Ryan behind the bar, and he's going to be fixing our drink for today and doing his best to serve us all. I don't know. It's pretty busy in here, so we'll see what he can do. Behind the scenes, they complain about me calling them guys. So the wonderful personnel behind the scenes, we have Aaron on the console, and he's working with a new internet connection today, which should be even better and higher quality, faster. We'll see how that works out.
Yep.
And Kyle is in the question seat. He's gathering up the great questions, and he's going to give them to me as we go throughout the day. I only have a little kind of a topic that I want to touch on today that's kind of a springboard off a question last week, but I'll get to that later on. And let's see, we're a couple minutes after. What do you have a good starter question for us?
I've got a couple questions.
What were you going to say?
I was going to say we showed that meme.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
that was some fan art.
Got that in the email today.
I think it was yesterday.
Yesterday, sorry. What was the name on that again, Aaron?
Xandro Zambi. His wife sent it, Pauline Kisner.
So, thank you so much for that piece of fan art. That was fun. We enjoyed that. Everyone thought it was...
Here, I'll throw it up again right
there you
quick
go. So people can see it. As
it
they
looks
go.
awesome. I love it.
It is a great piece of art. Thank you so much for offering that to us.
Yeah, if you're watching, thanks a lot. We appreciate it. Make some more.
Yeah. Now.
Yeah. Questions?
Now a question.
I only have a couple right now. But
Good.
I will ask them. First one is, why did certain people powder their white hair, including officers in the military? What was the powder made of?
Yeah, so wigs especially were very popular in the 18th century all the way through, and that starts to transition and change as you get into the early 19th century. It sort of disappears. That fashion was very, very fashionable in continental Europe, in Great Britain, and somewhat here in North America, but it's not as popular in North America. So you don't see wigs being worn as much. The military, especially the officers, they definitely wore wigs, and powdering them was a thing. That they powdered them to this white color, or whatever they had available. They had different sorts of formulations for this white powder. It might be something as simple as talc, or they might try to get a very good white color, so they'd use something like white lead powder and all sorts of different kinds of chalks. Inexpensive. If you didn't have any of those things available to you, you might use flour, because it's something that you would have around the house, and you would use that as a substitute really quickly. But normally you would not want to do that because of what flour is going to do when it gets wet, and it's going to go rancid, and it might it's just not what you would want to use except in a substitute kind of a situation.
How important was whaling in the 18th century?
Whaling is an important thing that's happening, and throughout that century, and especially when you get into early 19th century, it becomes very, very important, a very big industry for whale oil and spermaceti that comes out of the head of a sperm whale. So those commodities are worth a lot of money, and also, well, it does come out of their head. They're making motions. Yes, you did. And they then ambergris also. So ambergris, that stuff, I'm not sure exactly what it is, that comes out of a whale's stomach. That is sort of a greasy, smelly blob of thing.
It's a perfume thing, right?
Yeah. They would use it for perfume, but actually they used it in a lot of foods, especially, foods in the 17th century, maybe even 16th century. That and items like, rose water and orange flower water. They're adding those to foods to sort of perfume them. We don't do that too much to our foods today. The closest thing we have to a perfuming of food is vanilla, which sort of takes over that. And really, vanilla doesn't have a flavor; it really has a smell. Same thing. Ambergris is one of those items that is bringing this smell in and changing the flavor of how we taste foods, especially in that 17th century. You see them in the 18th century cookbook, but it's more than likely people were not bothering to actually put it in anymore. In the 18th century, it was just sort of a leftover thing.
What was the recipe we talked about that recently?
Ambergris or orange flower water or
ambergris?
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't too long ago.
Oh, it was the little candies, wasn't it?
Maybe, yes. Yeah, the little candies. Some of them had, again, like a candy thing. A lot of the flavoring is there as smell, and they would put ambergris in there.
Yep.
We need a short one, and because how are we doing with the drink back there?
Coming along.
Okay.
Well, this one kind of jumps off of that one, I guess. It says, when it comes to complaining, how important was whaling in the 18th century? Oh, man.
I don't know if they were that much of a complainer and if they did that much whaling.
All right.
Some people did, undoubtedly.
What ingredients are in a traditional ale?
In a traditional ale. Well, ale is a type of, we would call it a beer today, but ale is a less hopped or unhopped beer item. A barley wine, right? So they're very simple, like breads. You've got the grains in there. They bring in their own sugars and flavors, yeast and water. And that's about it. That's really the essence of an ale, and the quality of your water, the quality of your grains and your yeasts are really what makes and the technique, or what makes the difference between a really good one and a not so good one.
I'm wondering if their keyboards played tricks on them and they were asking what was in a traditional ale flip, because that's today's drink.
There we go. So that would be the guy. This guy back here would tell you about what's in a traditional ale flip.
A traditional ale flip has brown ale, a darker ale, rum. It has sugar and molasses and 1 egg. And so the idea is that, and we've done this one before, but we're doing it a little differently today. The idea is that you're going to beat your egg in a container, and you're going to combine all of the other ingredients in another container, and then you're going to flip those back and forth to mix them and to froth them up. And then scrape a little bit of nutmeg on the top, of course. And then, so that's the flip. They're saying people have different ratios. Really, it's just about how much rum do you want to taste, how much ale do you want to taste, and how sweet do you want it to be. So you can play with that as much as you want to at home.
Right. So a lot of ale, and a whole lot of sugar, and like a ton of nutmeg, and just a tiny bit of rum.
Well, yeah.
I'm going to get it the way he's going to make it.
I'm going to put more sugar in for you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. You got another question, Kyle?
I do. Will I get ejected from the tavern if I pass out my pamphlets against King George's tyranny against the colonies?
Against what?
Against the colonies.
I don't think so. No, we are pretty much an equal opportunity tavern here. If you want to be a royalist, we've got some tables over here. If you want to be one of those rebels, you can have the tables on that side. And we will try to keep the fisticuffs down in the center of the room.
This question came in like 3 parts, but he brought it down to a very small one for me. So thank you very much.
Good. Condensing it.
Why did the West Indies, Canada, and East-West Florida not rebel? They had the same tax issues as the 13 colonies.
Well, there has been a lot of discussion and talk about what really caused the revolution and the reason why they were rebelling. And was it because of the taxation, which compared to we needed how many more minutes? Are we there? We're going to hold on to that question because this has to. It's all right the way it is. Good. Here we go.
You see that okay?
Here we go. Can you see it? Oh. It didn't burst in flames. That's good.
Look at that.
So there we go. Oh, yeah.
Special guest Josh.
Special guest Josh. He brought in
Josh's
our hot
arm.
toddy rod. Now, I think this was the standard. I don't know which one this was. Jamie would tell us which one it was. I think that is the carbon steel. No. I'll have to think about that. Anyway,
Thank you, Josh.
here's our flip. It heated up. Thank you, Josh.
Yep.
Let's find out how this heated up. I was worried it was going to turn it into eggs.
I was worried that too, and I'm worried that it didn't heat it up enough.
Yeah, well, it could be that you need to have bigger ones for bigger drinks. Yeah, it's just sort of warmish.
Okay.
It isn't
Well, that's
hot.
probably not a bad thing.
Yeah, wonderful. Actually, I think this one turned out better than the last one. I think you're getting better at these.
Well, I put more sugar in for you, John.
There you go. A wonderful ale flip. It's got some really nice flavors in it.
Yeah. I really like that drink.
Well,
I
I'll
feel
come
like
back
it's-
to that and we'll talk about that. But this idea of why did they really rebel? Why did other places not rebel? Places like Florida, they weren't the same kind of a colony as the 13 colonies. Even Canada really wasn't the same kind of thing. Remember that those two places were, depending on the time period, just taken away from other countries. So, Canada had a much greater French influence. So they weren't ready to rebel against this other place. Same thing with Florida. That's a Spanish thing. And even though the British sort of take control over that, there's not that same kind of history and not as much of an established, let's say, commerce, established foothold of people that have their own sort of culture they're starting to build. And I think what's happening in the 13 colonies is they really have created their own culture enough that they feel like, hey, we can separate ourselves out. We are something of ourselves instead of we just were this and now we're something else and tomorrow we'll be something else yet again. There's also issues about a debt that certain people, very, very influential people in the colonies, were in great amount of debt, and by rebelling, they were going to basically extinguish all that debt, and so there was a great amount of reasons for that sort of thing to happen. Whether that's truly the only reason they did it or they had that in mind at all, I can't answer that question per se, but there are a lot of different factors, and that's why you see some of these other places, not necessarily being interested in rebelling versus the 13 colonies.
What kind of cider did you give me to try? What is this?
Do you not like it?
It's really, really sweet.
Well,
And it tastes.
I didn't make it.
It tastes like pumpkin cider.
yes,
Is that what it
it's
is?
pumpkin cider. I didn't have another drink for him, so I just grabbed something out of the fridge, and now he's.
Oh man, it's sweet. I'm gonna add some rum to this. Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
It's a wonderful beverage. It's very kind of you.
I'll take a rum cider, bartender.
Yeah.
Sorry, buddy. Oh God. Oh. It's fixing to have rum in it.
I'll just take a rum then.
All right.
All right.
Do that.
What? Boy, this is really, really good.
Is it?
Yeah.
So now I'm
feel like-
interested in trying it.
Yeah.
Now the question
Have a
is,
sip?
so let's talk
Yeah.
a little bit about this conversation. Number one, Jamie Tyree made that.
The
rod.
toddy rod. Yes.
And then I better get on camera if I'm going to talk, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jamie Tyree, who we did a video on about blacksmithing, made that toddy rod. And he's referenced another set of videos or a video on YouTube comparing a wrought iron toddy
Yes.
rod with a carbon steel, correct?
Right. The mild steel. Yes.
Oh, mild steel, okay. And so they were inclined to believe that there was a different taste or a different quality that was imparted depending on which toddy iron you use.
Yeah. Whether it was wrought iron or carbon steel.
So is anything that's happening in that drink, do you think that that's because of using a toddy iron and not because heating it prior?
I don't know. I think it's probably. I mean, sure that it's the toddy iron that
Yeah.
makes all the difference.
Wow, I don't believe you. Maybe I'm just the best bartender ever.
It
and
could
I'm
be. I think
improving
it could be the
still.
underlying drink. But it's definitely, you have to be careful with those irons. That particular iron only could have so much heat. It really needed to probably be bigger for this one. Toddy irons, that whole idea of heating up a drink with a heated iron is one of those things that shows up in a lot of different kinds of books and references in the 18th century. Sometimes they were called loggerheads. They also might use just a poker as the same sort of thing. So you'd have a fire poker, you just heat that up red hot and use that to transfer the heat into a drink. I also saw references to people using loggerheads, the same kind of equipment to heat up something like pitch. So not a drink, but you'd use it industrially to heat up other items. And pitch, you're on board ship, you want to get the pitch so it's hotter so you can work it into things. If the weather's a little bit colder, you need a way to heat that up, and it can be dangerous to bring fire out into your ship. So it was better to bring something like a loggerhead or a hot poker and heat up your pitch to get that so that you can start to work with it. So a lot of different references to using that sort of item. We don't, do that. We don't do that sort of thing today, having red hot things we take around and warm up items, but that happened in the 18th century. And you hear that item, that idea of we're at loggerheads. At times, these heavy iron objects lying around in a tavern situation where you might have two different sides with different ideas or two different people that are having an argument, and those are weapons at the ready, and people did fight with their loggerheads and try to whack people upside the head. So that's where that sort of people at loggerheads, that's where that comes from.
We'll read some donations off. Quite a few, actually. I'll let them go.
Uh-oh.
Now I gotta catch up.
Whacking.
Yep, slacking. Teddy the Fourth, thank you.
Thanks.
Teddy?
What type of games did they play in the 18th century? Specifically social games you would play at a tavern or a dinner party? It's a great question.
Yeah.
So
Tony Smith, thank you. What is your personal opinion on what happened to the Roanoke colony?
Ooh.
That's going to be a good one.
personal. That's
Max are cool, thank you.
Thank you.
thanks a lot.
Was citrus prized more for the peel / zest or for the juice?
Yeah.
Bryce Byerly, thank you. Just a tip for the ale flavor.
Okay, a tip. Yep. Mm-hmm.
David Dinelli, thank you. Yeah, nice donation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Were Dutch ovens used in homes frequently, or did most homes have a wall oven like in the cooking set? That's a good question. And then G, just G.
Whew.
Well, I like this question. Love the channel. Can we get a 420 special on recipes our forefathers would have made using hemp? Well, 420's on a Friday, maybe.
Man.
There we go.
Okay.
You're
Wow.
going to get dank in here.
Okay, from the top.
Question one.
What type of games did they play? Specifically, social games you would play
Yeah.
at a tavern.
Word games, and I know there's good references to some of those games in the 19th century or in the early 19th century. I don't have any of that, that I can just reference immediately for 18th century things. I wish I did, but I know that there were some of those sort of word games and conversation or, people gathering games that you would play, not necessarily board games, but those type of games. So yes, but I'm sorry I don't have one I could just...
Yeah, that's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah.
I've seen references to party games, but I never read the names of them, so I could research them.
Yeah. Next question: Roanoke Colony. Do we want to get into that? Is that like a super long thing?
No. The Roanoke Colony, that's that spot where they go where there was this sort of small colony and they come back a year later and boop, it's all gone. And all there is that, Croatoan or whatever that word is that was carved on the post that they didn't really have an idea what happened to these people, where they went, were they, were they starving and they went into the interior and connected up with Native Americans who fed them, which is probably more than likely what happened, or they tried to do that and they all died doing that. Were they disappeared by aliens? I don't think so. So my guess is that they tried to connect up with Native American tribes. They may have, stayed with them. They may have all died. Perished in the attempt. All those things are pretty. Now, why they couldn't leave a better message than that? Maybe they thought they would come back after a short period of time, so they didn't bother to leave any sort of word when they left. But those sorts of stories about things disappearing, and not necessarily colonies, but it seems that there's more than one reference to the same sort of things happening to sailing ships. Also, the Mary Celeste sort of story where you come upon a ship and there's nobody on it. Everyone is gone. And so there are multiple stories like that as we go through this time period, 17th, 18th, 19th century, and into the 20th century, where you do have situations where people disappear and nobody quite knows exactly, what happened to them. And it is a mystery. They probably all have great explanations, obviously, but they are mysteries.
Is this one of the standing now Roanoke's that this happened at?
I think it's Roanoke Island off the coast of Virginia.
Okay, well, there's Roanoke, Virginia, but I just didn't know if it was the same.
I think it's the island.
It was an island, okay.
Yeah.
Somebody commented that Roanoke had slow Wi-Fi. So they got
they all left. It's like, this is just pitiful. I can't hack
Out of here.
Yeah, well, in that sense, they did, because they had just no communication whatsoever. So, can you imagine how difficult we are? So immersed in communication now, and knowing what's happening all around the world all the time. We're able to, leave messages for people in 100 different ways, and they were completely cut off.
What was the next one? Oh, citrus being prized more for the peel or for the juice?
You actually see more references to using the zest and the peel in recipes than you do the juice necessarily. And I think because it imparts its flavor more completely in a lot of different ways than the juice does. We today don't use it quite as much. We use the juice possibly more often. And I think actually the peel tended to be possibly more sought after, especially since that you can preserve and have for multiple different days, whereas the juice, it's here today, gone tomorrow.
And then, Dutch ovens used in homes frequently, or did most homes have a wall oven like in our cooking set?
Yeah, so it definitely is changing over the time period and in the wealth of a household. And so many people are moving into new locations, or they're a fairly lowly economic household, and so they're going to be using those Dutch ovens, or they might call them camp ovens, or just iron, or it's like an iron oven in the time period. They have a lot of different words for it. But they're going to be using those very, very consistently in those settings where you have a new house, you're spot isn't built. If you want references to something like that, definitely check out the letters that are in the backcountry. It's backwoods of Canada. She talks about that, and that's early 19th century, where those camp ovens, they are the best friend of somebody who is out in that situation, and they haven't built their final house. So many times they go and they'll build a little tiny sort of shelter, and then they'll build a little tiny house while they're building their big house. And until their big house is done, has a real oven, they're using other types of ovens, which those iron ovens are perfect example.
I think that's it, other than the April 20th live stream that he wants us to do.
Yeah, that's a tougher one.
I mean, hemp is definitely an interesting
certainly,
topic for sure.
But it's used for rope, and what else they were doing with it is a little trickier to answer.
That's between them.
Do you
What
want
you
more
got,
questions?
Kyle?
More questions, John?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kyle.
All right. Do we know how folks in the 18th century maintained their metal tools? Did they use animal oils or etc.?
Well, we did do an episode on fat wax with
Cold cracker.
Coal Cracker. What's his real name?
Dan Wowak.
Dan Wowak. That's a tough one to remember. Dan Wowak. We did that fat wax one, and we used, I think, raccoon, but you could use a lot of different sorts of animal fats for that. Mixing a wax.
Simeon, what was Simeon carrying in his
He was
gun
using
stock?
bear
Yeah,
oil or
bear.
bear grease, depending on the situation. So those animal oils are very important for lubrication and for protecting animals, protecting tools. Protecting tools. You don't want them to get them rusty. They have to stay so that they're working. They don't go bad. So lots of those different sort of oils and fats mixed with waxes or not, depending on what you needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
What sorts of cosmetics did people wear in the 18th century? How was makeup used to indicate social class?
I gave you some books on that.
Yeah, I was researching pomatum at the time, but there were a lot of references to makeup, and it was very expensive.
You're right.
So it was not. I mean, only high class people were using makeup, maybe upper middle class, but I don't know how much of. Classes are kind of weird.
Yeah. Well, I think you also see a good bit of that being used in prostitution, or where the makeup is an important part of your thing.
But I think perfumes that was a bigger thing.
Yeah.
From what I can tell. So in hairstyles.
And there are some 18th century books, manuals that talk about making up these recipes for pomatum, for hair products, for skin products, using things like suet and different sorts of oils and waxes.
And the what was the word for the sperm whale? The head.
Spermaceti.
Spermaceti, yeah. It used that a ton.
Right.
But it's expensive stuff.
All fairly expensive. So you had lots of those things, certainly very available and important in the 18th century, especially in some place like Great Britain. Maybe still important, but not as important in North America.
You will find some of the cosmetic stuff in the back of cookbooks too.
Yeah.
And most of it is herbal remedy kind of thing, but you'll find some cosmetic stuff.
What cloth do you recommend for wadding for a flintlock if not using a cartridge?
You can use anything that was available in the time period. Any standard cotton fabrics, flannels are used many times. I would go with something straight and simple that they would have used, but it could be just about anything, because they would probably use rag items, cast-off clothing, pieces of clothing that when they reworked an old piece of clothing into a new piece of clothing, that have all these little bits that they would cut off. So it really doesn't matter which thing you use. It really depends on, excuse me, how much thickness that you need between the lead ball size that you have and the caliber of your weapon. So you might need a thicker a cloth or a thinner cloth. We had that. I did the Simeon video talk about the size of the ball in
Yes.
his rifle. So
Uh-huh.
if you want to check out Simeon's video where he talks about cleaning the gun, and he really references the size of the bullet compared to what we use today. Today we get a bullet that's very, very close to the size of the rifling in the barrel. In the time period, probably there was a good bit more windage, and to make it easier to load. Again, that thickness of the patch and the kind of fabric you use is going to make all the difference.
Yeah, I think that if they were using a ball that was pretty much the same size, a lot of people would use linen as well, right?
Correct.
I'm gonna throw that video in the comments.
Yeah.
That's a good video.
Yeah, it's a good video.
People are interested in that. Yeah, he goes pretty in depth, and there's probably a lot more that he didn't even cover.
Oh,
So there's
jeez.
a lot of info in there.
That guy's a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah.
In writing, was there any 18th century equivalent to the LOL? How did they imply wit, laughter, etc.? Thanks for all you do.
Yeah. I haven't done as much reading of pure manuscript and especially personal letters to people. There are a lot of letters that are available, but they tend to be sort of, the letters that get saved, the high-end letters. And those tend to be a lot more formal and not personal letters. I would check something to get an idea. There's the Adams's letters are available and very readily available, probably the most readily available letters that we have, to see what a husband and wife are saying and how they say it to each other. Sort of intimate language, but I don't even think they're as intimate as we would be, or as informal.
We have plans to have Brian Cushing come up here. Mm-hmm. He has access to a lot of letters between cousins and things like that. I'll ask him if he can bring in the examples of that kind of thing.
That would be great.
That'd be a couple
and
weeks.
That's toward the end of the month, right?
The 27th, yes.
Okay.
He's Brian Cushing is from Locust Grove.
Right.
He's the Wolverine-looking fella in the whiskey video.
How big of a role did taverns play in the life of people in the 18th century?
Probably a lot more important than we might think. Taverns were a community center in many different ways. They would have court in taverns. They would have auctions in taverns. They might have school in taverns and church in taverns occasionally. So it's going to be a meeting place for the entire community. There were problems with that, and there was some discouragement of the local population using the tavern too much. Depending on where you're at in the colonies in the time period, they didn't want them to be a place that hurt the community. So, but it really was one of the main community centers where people would get together. Stagecoaches are going to stop there, and so it is. You want to hear the news from the outside world. Well, you want to hang around at the tavern because that's where the travelers are going to be, and they're going to tell you those stories. So, very, very important part of a community in early North America.
How important was the use of a bayonet on the 18th century battlefield?
Bayonets are an incredibly important part of what's going on, and that's why there is, at times we think about how there were British regulars, and they had their muskets and they had their bayonets, and then there were all these American riflemen, and they had rifles, and the rifles didn't have bayonets. You can't fight the same kind of battle with rifles that you can with muskets, and really the American troops don't get as successful until they meet the British troops one-on-one with those same sorts of tools, muskets and bayonets, and the bayonets. I'm not connected or know that much about modern military techniques, but obviously bayonets aren't as important as they used to be in the 18th century. And boy, you closed ranks, you got close, and the bayonet was a very, very important part of battlefield techniques and technology compared to what they are today.
Can you do a series on 18th century Oriental dishes and cooking techniques?
I can hardly keep up with what I can do now. And really, in the 18th century, the Orient, and while it would be incredibly important, it's so different and so unconnected with what's happening in Great Britain and in continental Europe and in North America that it would be very hard for me to dip into that field and learn totally new things. While there was interchange within those two bigger cultural concepts, those generally were on the item list, right? So not personal culture, but material culture. So pottery is going to get traded, but foods aren't traded. So you really don't have too much of that. There's a little bit of, or certainly a quantity of Indian cuisine that's being transplanted into the UK in that 18th century time period, but not that much from further east, more of that Oriental stuff.
Would the results of the French and Indian War have been different if the French had access to Little Caesar's hot and ready pizzas?
I don't know about that. Probably not. I don't think pizzas would have helped them that much. I think it really was a sort of boy.
They were driven. They weren't going to be distracted by.
No. I think there's the whole idea of. No, I don't want to answer that. Yes. Yes, I think pizza would have made a big difference.
So real quick, I want to talk about this toddy rods again.
Yeah.
Because a lot of folks, when I posted to Instagram, did not know what it was.
Yeah.
And
okay.
I know that Jamie was really excited to see what this would be. So Jamie Tyree made those.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what they are, where they come up? What you can talk about loggerheads again, just for folks that hop on later.
What happens when you want to make your drink hot? Now, can you see that over there behind the fireplace? That little funny tin cup thing there?
Yeah, I can see it, yep.
If you could, I don't have it. I can't grab it. I have to get up. No, stay there. That's an ale shoe. And that is a similar thing. What happens if you want your drink hot? And we don't think about drinking our ales hot or our mixed drinks hot. Typically, we think if we're going to change the temperature, out of room temperature, we're going to make it cold. But making things hot was very popular in the 18th century, and they might heat up their drink in an ale shoe, and that's a tin cup that has this big, long, pointy tip that they can shove into the coals of a fire. You put it on the floor of your fireplace and shove it in under the coals. That would get your drink warm. But sometimes you want to do that faster, quicker, and you would use a toddy rod, or it might be called a loggerhead or just a poker. You get that red hot in the fire. You could have that you could always have one of those in the fire waiting to heat things up. That's the nice part. It's like, you just leave that in the fire. Whenever you want to heat something up, you pull it out of the fire and you plunge it into your drink. And that immediately brings it up to temperature. Not only does it bring it up in temperature, but it mixes it at the same time.
It's got a churning effect that an ale shoe doesn't have.
So you have this convection going on. It's heating things up. It's moving around. It's it's spitting and boiling, and they're fun to look at. They're scary and red hot and all that good stuff. You thrust it down in your drink, change its temperature. You might use those for heating up other things. Also, you might even use them over the top of a dish to brown the sugars on top. So use a salamander to do the same thing. So that's the sort of item that we used here in this to heat up this. Something that's just totally different than what we do today. That's what's kind of fun and interesting about it and exciting.
I want to send a special thanks out to Jamie because he sent those home with us to try. And he invited us into his house, and he showed us his wonderful property, and he sent some items home with us.
And he's probably on the live stream right now watching.
Let's hope
so.
Hello,
Jamie, if you're there.
Yeah.
And
we've got more coming up with him in the future. There's you want to talk about the sale that we're going to be working on next couple weeks?
We have been working on some specific products with him, a set of hand-forged wrought iron utensils. Again, if you watch those videos, the Jamie Tyree video, he talks a bit about that concept of using wrought iron, which is completely different from the mild steel that most people make things out of today. It's just head and shoulders weird. It works differently. It's made differently. It's just one of those sorts of strange things that disappears in the early 20th century. Check that out and make sure to watch what's going on the website. We'll talk about those when we have them available.
Yeah, right. And Aaron, can you grab that Jamie video and drop it in the chat maybe?
Yeah.
Thanks.
I did want to talk just a little bit about a different kind of follow up on one of those questions last week, which was why we study the 18th century, why we pay attention to the 18th century, and it's a topic that continues to come up for me. And one of the things that I didn't get to when I was answering that was, the answer at the time was, there's things that are happening in the 18th century that are similar that are happening to us today, and we need to see what's going on with those. The other part of that is how mistaken we are about what actually happened in the 18th century. What we get from what we learn in school about the 18th century and the Revolutionary War is this little tiny strange stereotypical answer about what life was like in the 18th century, and I don't think it was anything like that. And I am completely taken aback when I read some piece of research or some piece of period writing, how wrong I am about what life was really like back then. And so the more I read, the more I get a clearer picture of what's happening. I was reading something really interesting the last couple of days, and it can be really hard to research what's happening to regular people, or especially poor people in the 18th century. They don't write letters. People don't record what's happening to poor people. We don't have their recipes because they don't write those things down. But what records we do have are very illuminating. And one of the things I was looking at that was so different from today is something like the infant mortality rate in the 18th century. I don't know what the current infant mortality rate is for the United States or even third world nations here today, but the 18th century infant mortality rate was just incredible. Something like averaging between 150 and 200, maybe even more deaths per 1,000. So can you imagine greater than 10% of children dying before they get to the age of 1 year old? That's happening here in North America in the 18th century.
I don't know if we ever shared this information with you, but when Nicole was researching the child gown that's in the catalog, she read that they didn't, and most folks did not dress them in clothing other than the child gowns until they were around 6, because they weren't. It was unlikely that they would last that long.
Yeah, exactly. So, and for the poor, it's much worse. And there was some talk about the idea that maybe it was much better in North America than it was in Great Britain, and the records do not actually show that, even though there was a lot more urban things going on in, say, Great Britain, but their infant mortality rate was not worse than it was, say, in North America. There were a lot of very, very poor people in North America, and even in urban situations like Philadelphia or New York, those settings were very, very difficult to live into. And we can have this very, lofty, it was so simple in the 18th century and so easy to live, and we, put the little dolls on the little clothes on the dolls, and we think that's what history is, when it's much harder and more difficult when we dig in and really read what's happening to people and look at the research. That's kind of where I wanted to get at with. That's the reason why we dig into the 18th century. Not only is it the same as what's happening today, it's more the same than we can actually imagine. It was very, very difficult in that time period.
All I gotta say is, when you were talking about the infant mortality rate,
yes,
the most inappropriate song was playing in the background that I have on the playlist. It was
Happy Go Lucky.
Yeah, rowdy. I think one of my favorite things with tying into what you were saying was when we talked with the artist at Mrs. Sinawa, what was his name? Gary
Gary
Zaradka.
Zaradka, yeah.
Zaradka.
Him being really, really passionate about, no, in the 18th century, it wasn't brown and drab and they had colors like what you're
Yes.
wearing now.
Yes.
Like some people might go, "What? That's not 18th century." No, they had their stuff looked new at the time, and they had colors and all
Yes.
that.
Yes.
And the stereotype is kind of like it was just
And we
muted
like the question about the reasons for the revolution, or why did these places didn't revolt and other places
Yes.
did. We can make these simples. We can make it very, very simple. Oh, they revolted because of the taxation, when it was a very, very complex
Right.
issue with a lot of different reasons.
Not
about
to
why
mention
things
that, I mean, if you go into it, everybody's got their own individualized reason that they
Yes.
do that as well.
Very true.
You don't just jump on the bandwagon because everybody's doing it when it comes to revolution. You have a reason for that,
Yeah.
or you have a reason to stand against it. So,
And we can look back on it and make those decisions. We can put the right reasons into their heads, right?
Right.
When it wasn't necessarily true at all.
Well, even this comment right here, somebody saying, "I thought 18th century food was bland until I saw what
Yeah.
we were doing." And I mean, I would have probably said the same.
sure.
Right.
Food, boring, but it's delicious, and they're really complex recipes. So yeah, it's an awesome thing to dig into.
Yeah.
Hey, we've got an Instagram contest every week.
Yeah. So every week we go through, Ryan goes through, I go through sometimes the Instagram feed looking for items that have the hashtag Townsends. And we're looking for things that have to do with history, have to do with, merch items. People do recipes or they have particular items. We look for things in that Instagram feed and we pick out something we think is a winner and we send them something. Right, Ryan?
Yeah, we do.
He's in charge of it, so.
Angel Wings Love won this week.
Okay.
Angel Wings Love 17, excuse me. And I chose it because it was a good photo. They were in the woods with a cooking system, but they were also making mushroom ketchup. And I thought, well, there's a double banger because we
Yeah.
like cooking systems and mushroom ketchup.
And mushroom ketchup. That's
right.
Really good stuff.
So they won, and thank you. There were a ton of really good photos this time around.
I was looking through it the other day.
Yeah.
It was-
So thank you so much for participating in that.
yeah. And if you're interested, hey, you got an interesting picture, historical, whatever, just make sure to put the hashtag Townsends in there. If you want to help us find it, then also at Townsends _official, or there's even an 18th century cooking one.
There is, but that's not part of the contest, and it's not nearly as cool. So go follow Townsends
Or
_official right now.
18th century cooking. That's a good one too.
Kyle, you got any questions?
I do. Is it time for the lightning round?
Man,
Are we
we're
there?
getting close.
Are we there to lightning
Let's wait
round?
5 minutes. Let's do 2 long questions
All right,
first.
2 long questions. Here we go.
You got it, John.
Take another drink. Here we go. In the 18th century, how... Oh, wow. This question was worded weird. Sorry.
I've never heard that word before either.
Wow.
In the 18th century, what was the age range? Did people... Oh, my gosh. I'm going to do a different question because that one's
Hard to
read
interpret.
right now.
Commenter, I'm sure that
Sorry.
you wrote that question very well. Thank you for
Yes.
your comment.
And I'm just being a dope. I never see you decorate your hat with a feather or a plume in your videos. Was it not popular in the colonies to decorate hats?
don't think it was as popular as you might expect. I think a lot of people, it's like, I want to stick something in my hat. The vast majority of the pictures you see don't have, they might have a cockade on their hat, ribbon, but you don't see that many feathers or strange things hanging out of their hats.
But man, we grab onto that stuff, don't we?
Yeah, we love
We see
that.
a feather in a hat on a Disney show when we're a kid, and then
phew,
that's
everybody's got a
history.
feather.
All right, I'm going to try this question again now that I've
Now you've
read
got
through it.
Read it.
Yeah. In the 18th century, what was the age range did people put themselves into indentured servitude?
Okay.
Ooh.
Yes. So, indentured servitude can happen at any age, and really, it's just straight up. This indenture is just another word for a contract. They indented a contract, which they to link 2 versions of this contract, so that the person who owns the contract and the person who is being contracted, to prove that they are the same contract, they would cut a design on it so that they could link them together, like that little locket with the heart that's cracked, and you give it one half to one
Best
person, one half
friends.
to the other. Yeah, best friends, whatever. Same thing, except it's not friends, but it's a contract. And that holds these two pieces together, so each of them has a copy of it. And it can happen at any age. Generally, children might be indented or bound to a contract as early as 7 or 8 years old. And you can have people even later in life doing that exact same thing. So they might need to. They want to come to the new world, but they don't have the money to pay for the trip. They would pay for the trip by signing this contract that says, "I will be an indentured servant, a bound servant to someone for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 7 years." Generally, the top end is 7 years. For these contracts, most of them were less than that. 5 years is kind of a typical thing. But children many times were indentured or bound to people. It was kind of similar to an apprenticeship, and some apprenticeships were indentured. They had a contract that was written that same kind of way. Different people were indentured for things that you wouldn't think was true. So you're a homeless person in a community. You didn't have any support. They might take you up, put you in jail, and bind you to somebody so that you were indented. You were bound by contract to somebody else. And they looked at it as a positive. You had to work for that person, but you were being taken care of. Children, same thing. You might be an orphan, or your parents couldn't support you. The community would take you in and then bind you out to somebody. There was a lot of abuses in that situation, a lot of very terrible abuses in that. So it had its positives, it had its negatives. It's just so different than the world we have today. We can't even sort of grasp it.
This is a popular subject. We've got
Yes.
a lot more information on indentured servitude coming out in the next coming weeks.
Yeah, and it is a
month.
deep topic that we're just so alien to us that we don't get it.
Months just to be safe.
Okay, months.
Well,
I'm just joking.
weeks can mean 6 weeks, right?
We're
22
working on
weeks in
we're
the
gonna
next-
working on some
in
more
the next-
specific content for that.
30 or so weeks.
Yeah. In the next 30 or so. Let me get some donations real quick, then we'll do the rapid fire. These are pretty quick.
Okay,
Aaron C., thank you.
thank you,
Aaron C., thank you.
Have a great, historically accurate weekend. Will do.
We will.
I'm not going to. Nope.
You're living in the modern world.
I just moved, man. I got Wi-Fi the first time in 3 years. I'm going. Look out.
Keltoid 5, thank you. Thanks for bringing back flavors and aromas. Yep. I think it's working out pretty well.
It's all Aaron. It's all Aaron. He's the one who brought it back.
So this is pretty cool. Keltoid 5 has a different Instagram name, and Keltoid 5 won the Instagram contest like a week or two ago.
Yeah.
Or something like that. But I didn't know it was him. And then he messaged me during last week's live stream, so I was actually like over here where people couldn't see me chatting with him.
Thank you.
David Greek, thank you.
Thank you.
G again. What was the fight game like back then? Boxing?
Ooh. Oh yeah.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
What else? There are quite a few. Thanks, everyone. Philip, love your videos. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, Philip.
I think that's it for now.
Boxing. Boxing was actually really, really important and got very, very popular in the late 18th century. And we don't need gloves. Rules, there's some rules, but not anything like the rules we have today for, the boxing that we might think of. I'm not totally familiar with some of the other sort of boxing permutations that might be popular today, but it is a pretty rough trade in the 18th century. But it was certainly popular, and, like the Mendoza fights and all those sorts of things. Those are really exciting things going on in the late 18th century and into the 19th century. So it'd be interesting to see how much of that was going on in North America. I don't have a lot of that kind of research right off the top of my head, but it was popular. And at Locust Grove a couple of
Yeah.
years ago, they had during the
Jane Austen.
the Jane Austen Festival, they even had a boxing match from the early 19th century. That was fun. And
One thing I've
interesting.
wondered about is, were they writing about those sporting events in almanacs or in papers form at all? Was that
I
being
think you're
reported on?
Yeah, in newspaper articles and such like. Yeah,
Okay.
there's probably some great research that's been done on that.
All right, rapid fire.
There's so much. There's so much to dig into. Go ahead.
All right, here we go. When did they start putting hops into alcohol?
Oh, hops is early. Even though that we don't think of hops as they were using multiple different types of hops type herbs to do a hops job. I think that you're going to see that as early as the 14th, 15th century.
How common were USA stamped buttons among soldiers' uniforms in the Continental Army?
Very popular.
And in different versions.
Yes.
What was a popular rum in the 18th century, light or dark?
It was probably pretty dark stuff.
What types of cheeses would a colonist of the 18th century consume? Was cheese popular?
Cheese was incredibly popular. It's a food preservation technique.
Rapid fire, John.
What was that?
Rapid fire.
There you go. Yes.
What kinds?
Cheese types.
Yes, cheese, good.
Cheshire, there's hard, there's soft. They're going to have both different kinds, and you're going to want to. There you go. That's the answer. That's the.
Could you do an episode on showing how to make a kitchen like the German kitchen?
I could, but it would take a lot of effort.
So no.
Just make an earthen oven. That's what you
There's a
should
lot of
you
videos on Earth and Oven
Yeah.
When was ice cream invented?
building. It's early, and you see multiple different ice cream recipes in this 18th century English cookery cookbooks.
There's tons of ice cream.
So,
in the 18th
I mean, I
century.
think that if you go back further, that's more continental, Italian, etc. But it's definitely an 18th century English thing.
Are you Team Hamilton or Team Burr?
Hamilton or Burr? Probably. I'm not. No comment.
Could you do something with woodworking on a foot-powered lathe?
Yes, I could.
Have you ever considered starting doing a podcast or recording historic books for audio?
We've never ever talked about it one time.
Yes.
It's been a major topic
I've got
of
some
conversation.
test book things I'm working on right now, and we're deep in podcast conversation and this internet connection that we're testing out this today is there to help us so that we can interview people and do live interviews. So we need to have a lot more bandwidth to do that.
We
So,
may
yes.
or may not be experimenting with that in the coming weeks.
Yes.
Next 30 weeks or so.
Yes.
Yeah, next 30 weeks.
Hopefully sooner rather than later.
How did people stay warm in the 18th century? Fire.
Yeah, there's fire. There's a lot of clothing and, heavy clothing, and they expected to be cold. They expected to, suffer more than we suffer today. It's the world they lived in, and they did not complain about it as much. They weren't miners.
How do you handle viewing the information you learn in your research through the lens of modern day life? Answer that one quickly.
Try that one again. Just run it.
How do you handle viewing the information you learn in your research through the lens of modern day life?
I don't know. It's hard for us to do that through a modern lens, and understand is difficult. That's one of the reasons why we do history, why we go out and camp, or we try these things, because it gives us a different lens that's closer to theirs to understand it.
All right, we got 1 minute, 3 questions. Let's go.
Ooh.
Okay. Are you able to do anything you are doing without having a breakdown?
No, I am breaking down constantly.
Oh, man. Oh. I'm sorry, man.
This
There
was the last one. You got
Yeah.
to find the last one.
my last one. What's with you and Nutmeg?
Huh.
Nutmeg is interesting and it's yummy and it shows up over and over and over again.
I forgot the nutmeg in your drink today.
I got it right here.
Okay.
Don't worry. I've got the nutmeg
that, man.
right here. It's an important thing in the 18th century, and that's why we talk about nutmeg a lot, because it shows up a lot.
That's
the short answer.
It's hard to find even a cocktail without a scrape of nutmeg.
Exactly.
It's nuts.
Exactly. Even though someone sent this funny link with who's the famous French cookery person who did all those television shows? Can't remember her. But she had a thing about, putting too much nutmeg in your thing, and you don't want to be able to taste the nutmeg. You want it to just bring its flavor in, and I don't know. I want to taste it. Anyway.
I've put too much nutmeg one time for you. You have reached your limit.
That's because I had to strain it with my teeth. So it's the end of this wonderful live stream. Thank you guys back here doing the technical things and the questions. Thank you, Ryan, for the excellent flip. This is better than last time.
Nice.
Excellent. And thank you guys for all your just tremendous questions and your interest wanting to understand the 18th century. It's important that we kind of get together and talk about these things and think about these things. And you're the reason why we do this, why we do this channel, why we do these live streams. It's you guys out there. So thank you so much for everything you do, watching the videos, your super chat, your Patreon supporters. Thanks so much, and thanks for watching today.